COVID-19 is a global challenge which ultimately asks for global scientific and technological solutions. Technion, we have already started to direct the brainpower of our faculty to addressing these challenges.
We really need to take this virus very seriously, and more for the safety of the community at large, in particular those that are compromised within the community.
What we did, and this is a joint team of Rambam Medical Center and the Technion, is to show that we can use a current detection method for coronavirus and even the current equipment, yet with much increased screening capacity.
My lab and I have teamed up with Rambam Hospital and a couple of friends from Boston to develop a rapid and simple diagnostic test to be performed at home. The idea is to use your saliva to test whether you're positive or negative for COVID-19. Negative would be pink, positive would be yellow.
In my lab, we harness thermal imaging together with machine learning techniques to monitor the body temperature and breath patterns of subjects from afar. This system is already operational and is located at the Bellison Hospital here in Israel.
We invented a technology, a feed, that boosts the immune system of animals and protects them against viral diseases. We understand how the virus works. We understand where we can actually attack the virus to stop its progression inside the body.
We hope to prove that actually our ghosts can entrap the particle of the viruses and serve as a decoy and actually clean the lung from the virus, or at least most of the viruses that try to infect.
We're developing a novel pulmonary drug delivery platform. It's called liquid foam therapy, or LIFT. Now, LIFT is potentially a game changer in respiratory therapy. Its first application is for acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS. ARDS is the leading cause of death in severe COVID-19 patients, and there are no cures available. LIFT will potentially be the next rescue therapy.
The concept behind this regenerative mask is actually to put the oven inside the face mask and actually hook it to a phone charger, which we have, all of us. This invention actually allows you to reuse your mask over and over again.
Maya sticker was developed at the Faculty of Mechanical Engineering. We are upgrading the surgical mask with the Maya sticker, which is attached to the outer surface of the surgical mask. The Maya sticker consists of two elements, nanofibers and biocidal agent. We hope that soon most of the world is going to use the Maya stickers, which was developed at the Technion.
Looking forward, I see the role of this greenhouse canopy much larger than right now just fighting the coronavirus. And I think it's going to be a gold standard in every hospital, so to have several of these greenhouse canopies, even much after that coronavirus is not the main threat of the world.
We used a system that is based on this manifold. The air going out from this manifold from the forehand in an angles that are changing toward the sides, so better protecting the face, adding protection to the face using this filtered air, using a blower.
Here we develop materials that can limit the spreading capabilities of the coronavirus. So we develop special polymers that they can spread them in the different surfaces and can limit the spreading capabilities of the virus, thus can kill it and stop this pandemic and limit it as maximum as possible.
So what is the product that we developed? First of all, the robot can deliver food and medical cargo up to 30 kilograms. It has a rechargeable battery up to 10 operational hours and easy operation.
We've developed a simulator that allows policymakers as well as the general public to assess and compare different intervention steps taken to address COVID-19. For example, assess the impact of closure of schools and so on.
In this research, we harness our previous work on sewer systems. And what we are developing is a smart surveillance and early warning system for corona epidemic spreading. Looking up the sewer system, we can track hotspots of corona morbidity. We can give decision makers the much needed information where to invest the efforts, either to quarantine or to treat the population.
שלום וברכה, קוראים לי גלזר דניאל, ואני עכשיו אדבר רק באנגלית. Hi, good evening, my name is Daniel Glaser, and I'm going to be your host and in conversation with our main speaker this evening. I'm a neuroscientist by training. I'm speaking to you from my bedroom in London with my father-in-law's piano behind us, which we can use if we need to later. And it gives me enormous pleasure to welcome you to this evening's chat, which will take about an hour to go through. I'm sure most of you are here because of your knowledge and love for the Technion, if not your knowledge and love for sleep. Technion, as you will know, is Israel's leading Nobel Prize-winning university. It's ranked the top 10 science and technology universities in the world. And it changes lives everywhere by its combination of research in engineering, computer science, technology, and medicine. Technion scientists in almost 50 laboratories work around the clock, and I did my PhD in Israel, so I know what that means, to find groundbreaking solutions for the biggest pandemic problems of our age. And they've been working particularly, if you've seen in that video just now, on COVID-related stuff, because much of the research there is driven by need. And our speaker this evening, Professor Peretz Lavie, was president of Technion from 2009 to 2019, so left it in a perfect state to handle the current crisis, although he did continue his science throughout his time as president, which we'll talk about. And in that time, he transformed the university into a global player. He created the Technion Sleep Medicine Center and has written a number of books on sleep disorders. He's exceptional because he's been a pioneering researcher, a successful entrepreneur, and a successful and effective academic administrator. And it's very rare to keep all of those three together. He's considered one of the founders of sleep medicine. When I did my PhD in the 90s already, his work was greatly respected in that field and has published more than 400 scientific articles and 8 books in the field of sleep research and disorders. The running order this evening is that I'm going to hand over to Peretz now, who's going to speak for about 20 minutes to give you kind of an overview of the subject. And then I'm going to rejoin him and you, and we're going to have a conversation. There are hundreds of you present this evening, which we're really delighted about. So please do use the Q&A function inside Zoom to communicate with us as we go along. I almost certainly will not be able to answer every question that you raise, but it would be great to hear from you. So please do use that technology as we go. So it gives me enormous pleasure and I must say a degree of excitement to introduce our speaker, Peretz Lavie. If you clap, we won't be able to hear you, but if you feel that you'll enjoy his talk more, then you can give a small round of applause to welcome him.
Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate your introduction. And good evening from Israel. Indeed, we are meeting in unusual times. In fact, I don't believe there was any period in the last century during which sleep of almost every person on Earth was influenced or affected by a single stressor, a global stressor. And there is no wonder that sleep is affected, and there is no wonder that dreams are affected. Sleep is a very sensitive barometer of our emotional and mental life. And sleep responds to crisis. We tend to lose sleep over worries, over anxiety, when we meet stress during our daily life. So there is no wonder that the anxiety over an unseen enemy, a tiny virus that was inflicted on us, and everything surrounding it is a cause of sleep disturbances. And sleep is very important. We cannot function without sleep. Sleep is also very structured. Every night, each one of us is going through the same voyage. We go from one sleep stage to another. We spend the same percentage of time in different sleep stages, in deep sleep, in light sleep, in dreaming sleep. And when sleep is affected, some of us respond with inability to fall asleep. We call it sleep onset insomnia. But once we fall asleep, we sleep throughout the night. Other people fall asleep easily, but awake multiple times during sleep. And this is frequent awakening insomnia. Again, sleep is fragmented. And for this reason, we don't get enough of each one of the sleep stages that are necessary to provide us with a sense of well-being and vigorous in the morning. And then some people have a different kind of insomnia, not sleep onset, not multiple awakenings, but what we call early morning awakening. They fall asleep easily, they sleep soundly during the night, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, they wake up 2 or 3 hours before their planned awakening time. So this is early morning awakening. And anxiety and stress can cause either one of these 3 types of insomnia or any combination of this insomnia. And as I said before, the reasons for insomnia, for inability to have a good night's sleep are multitude. The anxiety over health, the anxiety over economic issues, the social distancing, the need to isolate ourselves in a very small enclosure, the flooding of information about the virus and about the spread of the pandemics, the anxiety over other family members. All these reasons are causing insomnia, and this is normal. So when we respond with insomnia, with inability to fall asleep, to a stress, this is a normal response of our brain to stress. The problem is, once this transient insomnia that should disappear, once the stress disappears, when this transient insomnia is anchored and become chronic insomnia, which means it persists beyond the stress. I'll give you an example of transient insomnia. During the Gulf War, when Israel was attacked by the Scud missiles, it was clearly affecting sleep. Most of the attacks came during the night, and people were afraid to go to sleep. And at that time, we followed sleep of Israeli citizens using ambulatory monitors. Now it's called Fitbit. At that time, we called them actigraphs. These were experimental. And we could easily see that people were afraid to go to sleep. What happened if an attack comes during the night and I'm sound asleep and I don't hear the alarm? So at that time, we suggested to open what we call the silent channel. And this was a radio channel that was kept open and activated only in case of an alarm. So people could go to sleep, leaving this silent channel open on full volume. And in case of an attack, they could be easily awakened from sleep. And we saw a marvelous change in sleep quality. People were not afraid to go to sleep. Interestingly enough, once the Gulf War was over, insomnia disappeared. So this was a true transient insomnia that disappeared once the stress of the Scud missile attack disappeared. So how you avoid the trap of becoming a chronic insomnia? And there are several easy steps that one can take in order to avoid the, I would say, the transition from transient insomnia, which, as I said, is a normal response to stress, or something that everyone experiences during stress, to a chronic insomnia that persists long after the stress is gone. First, people must preserve their routine life. Sleep is governed by a brain mechanism. It's called the circadian clock. This clock in the brain synchronizes our sleep-wake behavior with the light-dark cycle, so we go to sleep during the dark period. The hormone that mediates this synchronization is called melatonin. Melatonin is secreted during the dark period. It starts to increase in our blood about a couple of hours before we go to sleep, and it is very high during the dark period and then decrease during the light period. During the pandemic time, many of us do not preserve the routine sleep-wake cycle. We go to sleep late at night because we don't have to wake up to work in the morning. We sleep late in the morning, again, because there are no obligations, and the circadian clock become misaligned with the light-dark cycle. So keeping a routine of regular sleep times and regular wake-up times are very important to protect your sleep from insomnia. This is something that is very essential for a normal and healthy sleep. Second, exposure to light. We need to be exposed to light in order to suppress the level of melatonin during the day. So when we are isolated in our house, when we keep social distance, sometimes we are not exposed to sunlight. So during the day, make sure that you are exposed to sunlight for at least a couple of hours, either on the porch or during a window or a short walk around the house, if this is allowed and permitted, etc. And of course, physical activity. We limit in isolation, or when we are forced to be isolated, our physical activity. And this is also important for regulating sleep-wake cycle. So regular sleep-wake cycle, going to sleep at about the same time, waking up during the morning at about the same time, exposure to sunlight, and maintaining physical activity during the daytime period. These are all cues for the circadian clock to continue functioning in a normal way. Now, again, in addition to isolation, in addition to anxiety, we are flooded with information. We are flooded with TV clips. We are flooded with news about the pandemic in different parts of the world, the number of deaths, the number of infected people, the stress of the medical staff, etc. Try to limit this exposure. This exposure overflood our senses and they affect our sleep. Try to limit yourself, say, to 15 minutes during the day, during which you listen to the news, you listen to the information about the pandemic, and don't do it before going to sleep. During at a certain time, in order to have a window during which you get all the bad news of the day or all the information of the day that can affect your sleep. This is also very, very important and very helpful in order to, I would say, protect yourself from going to bed and continue rehearsing what you just listened on the TV or on the radio about the pandemic in South America or in Australia or in Europe, etc. So what happened if indeed you go to sleep, you spend time in bed, and you cannot fall asleep? Don't try to fight it. don't try to force yourself into sleep. If you see that sleep is delayed, get out of bed. Get out of bed, go to a different room, go to a chair, take a book, open a TV, again, not news that will tell you about the pandemic, but something more relaxing. And then when you feel more ready to sleep, go back to bed. The reason is we do not want to associate lying in bed with the feeling of insomnia, with the feeling of stress, of inability to fall asleep. Otherwise, you become conditioned that when you go to bed, immediately this tension of uncertainty, will I fall asleep? Am I going to stay awake, etc., will disrupt sleep, and it's a vicious cycle. You would like to abort this vicious cycle. What about sleep medications? On many occasions, people resort to sleep medications. In the long run, most sleep medications lose their efficacy, and you have to increase the dosage in order to retain the efficacy. If indeed you use sleep medication, try to make a contract with the sleep medication to use it for a short and limited period of time. Say, I'm going to use it for 10 days and that's it, in order to establish again a good sleep routine and then withdrawal from the sleeping pill. There is a tendency for dependency, and there is a tendency for tolerance, which means the sleep medication stop affecting you, and then you increase the dose, and again a vicious cycle is created. So sleep medications can be helpful in some situations. Don't use it over a longer period of time, short period of time, and again, do it with a kind of a contract. You sign a contract with the sleeping pill. I'm going to use you only for a week or for 10 days. Many people ask me about melatonin. Melatonin, as I said, is a hormone that affects sleep, and melatonin is secreted by the brain, by a specific portion of the brain called the pineal gland, and it is secreted during the dark period. Some people respond to melatonin, some people don't, but there is no harm in using melatonin. There is no dependency issue. And melatonin is also an anti-inflammatory and antioxidant, so it has also some positive beneficial effects in addition to inducing some readiness for sleep. But unlike sleeping pills, don't use melatonin too close to your bedtime. Use melatonin about an hour before your planned sleeping time, because it takes time to melatonin to affect the sleep mechanism. And this is something that many people do not know, and they use melatonin like a sleeping pill 10 hours before they go to bed. No, use it at least about an hour before you go to bed. So this is the impact of stress on sleep. There are ways to avoid the development of chronic insomnia, chronic inability to sleep. And I can assure you that most of you who suffer from insomnia, once there is a change and we are going to be immune to the coronavirus and it's going to disappear from our life, sleep will return to normal. Another interesting issue is dreaming. Many people reported that during the last few months, they remember dreams better than any other time in their life. The dreams are very vivid, and some of the dreams are very bizarre, very awkward. And it's very interesting because already there are some studies. By the way, I checked the number of scientific papers on sleep and dreaming published with the COVID-19 in the title of the paper. There are 433 papers that were published with the words COVID-19 in their title and sleep. So this has become a very, very hot area of scientific research. So why suddenly we remember dreams more than any other period in our life? And there are several reasons for remembering dreams and the vividness of the dream. First of all, we tend to remember dream. The reasons for remembering dream are linked with the stage of sleep from which we wake up. As I told you before, sleep is structured with three types of sleep: very deep sleep, light sleep, and dreaming sleep. Dreaming sleep appeared every 90 minutes, but they appeared in such a way that the first dreaming period, or as we call it, REM period, rapid eye movement period, is very short, 5 to 7 minutes. An hour and a half, 90 minutes after falling asleep, the first dreaming period appears. You can easily see it in a laboratory when you measure eye movements, brain waves, and muscle tension. The eyes are moving like we are watching some visual scene. The brain is almost awake based on the brain waves, and we are totally paralyzed. The large muscles of the body are inhibited, so we are paralyzed. 5 to 7 minutes later, we return to light sleep and then to deep sleep. During these sleep stages, brain waves are completely different. They are much slower, sometimes much higher with respect to the amplitude. You can imagine a stormy sea with huge waves. This is deep sleep. There are no eye movements, and there is some muscle tension. An hour and a half later, 90 minutes later, the second dreaming period appears, and this is not 5 to 7 minutes, now it's 10 to 15 minutes. And then 90 minutes later, the third dreaming period appears, and this can be between 15 minutes and half an hour. So if you go to sleep, let's say at 10 o'clock at night, and you wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, you have between 4 and 5 dreaming periods, and the longest dreaming periods are toward our awakening in the morning. But if you go to sleep, say at 2 o'clock in the morning, and we wake up at 11 o'clock in the morning, the last hour of sleep can be entirely dreaming sleep, because sleep tends to appear late at night, toward the early morning hours, the wake-up period that we usually wake. So the longer we sleep, or the later we sleep, the more chances are that we spend the last hour of sleep during dreaming sleep. And when we wake up from dreaming sleep, we remember about 90% of our dreams. If we wake up from other sleep stages, the recall rate go down to 20%, sometimes 10%, or even not recall at all. So the stage of sleep is critically important for the remembering of dreams. And the later we wake up in the morning, the higher is the chance to remember the dream. Now, the vividness of the dream is dependent on the depth of sleep. If we sleep very deep, when we wake up, dreaming sleep, open the, I would say, the drawer of dreaming, we can have access to the dream, but for a very short period of time. It's a fleeting memory. And if we do not focus on what happened in the last few minutes, we immediately forget the dreams. When we sleep lightly, like during an anxiety period, when we have insomnia and we have multiple awakenings, the distance between the brain during sleep and the brain during wake is such that we will remember dream vividly. We will remember many more details, and this is a characteristic of the dreams that people reported during the pandemic. There are very few examples of a change in dreams during such a period on a global scale compared to what we witness now. Interestingly, it proves the fact that all of us dream about things that concern us. We dream about our life during the waking period. We dream about the things that are of concern to us during our waking part of the day. And I'll give you an example from a study we did in the Technion during the 80s. During the 80s, the Technion had about 8,000 students, 7,500 of them were men. So it was a men city. We brought a group of students to the laboratory and we connected them to the electrodes, and each time they entered dreaming sleep, we woke them up to report their dream. The interest of the study was, what is the subject of dreams of Technion students in such a men city? And we hypothesized that maybe the most important subject will be the opposite sex. They will dream about women. They will dream about students of other universities. Surprisingly, when we analyzed the dream and we collected hundreds of them, we found out that the #1 subject in the dream was going on a reserve duty to Lebanon. This was a period where many of the students did reserve duty. And who is going to copy the lecture? Who is going to sit for them in the classroom? This was the concern during the daytime. This was the concern during dreams. So we dream about things that are important to us. And this is why many of us dream about the pandemic in one way or another. So thank you very much for listening. This was in a nutshell some information about sleep and dreams in times of coronavirus. Daniel?
Hi, Peretz. That's really cool. Thank you. And I can see from the Q&A chat that you've already excited a lot of people's interest, and we'll try and cover as many of the topics that have been raised as possible. I should say in passing also that there are many hundreds of you here. For those of you that aren't, or if you have friends that would enjoy this talk, is being recorded, and you'll be able to watch it again on the Technion UK website if you have difficulty sleeping in the future. Can I just say, now, I mean, I'm a neuroscientist, right? So I don't want to prejudice this, but do we really understand, Peretz, what sleep is? Like, I mean, we know what respiration is, right? So respiration, there's oxygen in the air and there's carbon dioxide in the blood, and we take the air in and it goes through the lungs, and then there's the bloodstream and the hemoglobin and, you know, and all that stuff, and you can get carbon monoxide poisoning or hypoxia, blah, blah, blah. So we kind of know about respiration. I can tell you a story about it. Do we have anything like that kind of basic understanding of what sleep really is?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, of course. What sleep is all about. Interestingly enough, the major breakthrough in understanding sleep came during the Spanish influenza pandemic. It's interesting that during that period, when people had the Spanish influenza pandemic, many died and some became insomniac. They died because of lack of sleep. When I mean lack of sleep, they couldn't sleep at all. They slept normally, and then suddenly they stopped sleeping for days, and then they died. Some became hypersomniac, which meant they slept too much. These are the sleeping beauties. They slept for weeks. There was a Viennese neurosurgeon, psychiatrist, who studied the brain of patients who died because of insomnia and the patients who died from hypersomnia, too much sleep or no sleep at all. And he found that the lesion, the inflammation in the brain in these two groups of patients occur in different places. In one group, it affected a mechanism that left the patients with inability to fall asleep. In the other group, it affects a mechanism that make the patients unable to keep awake. And he hypothesized that sleep is a balance between two centers in the brain that are connected and of course influence each other. So we know now that the brain controls our sleep by a wake center that keep us awake and by a sleep center that keep us asleep. But there is no doubt that sleep has many, many functions. To think that...
Actually, I was going to ask that precise question, in fact, because you've alluded already to the fact, which I don't know if most people know, that you can actually die from lack of sleep. Now, we've spoken, and I think very helpfully, and from the comments in the Q&A about insomnia, and clearly, you know, telling people as the evening draws in that you can die from lack of sleep is not a helpful thought to take to bed with you. But so it's important to emphasize this is in very extreme cases.
Oh,
but,
very, very extreme cases.
Yeah, it's very rare. But, yep. But I guess my question is then, we understand maybe some of the basic physiology underlying it, but do we understand the function of it? Like, what is the purpose of sleep to life? Why did we evolve it?
Yeah, we pay a dire price for sleep, so it must have a function. And as Bill Dement, one of the greatest sleep researchers who died 2 months ago, said, if sleep has no function, this is the greatest mistake ever of nature. Sleep, we know now, is important for memory. Sleep is important for the immune system. Sleep is important for most of the homeostasis, the inner stability of our physiological mechanism. I'll give you an example. If you take an animal like a rat and you prevent it from sleep, say for 10 days, you can keep it for 10 days, the animal loses the ability to sense temperature. So in fact, not only to lose temperature, but the metabolic balance is completely changed. So sleep is important for the stability of our mechanisms that keep us, I would say, at a 37 degrees temperature, the insulin and sugar levels, etc., etc. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, it is very important for memory, particularly consolidation of memory from short-term to long-term memory.
Let me just come back to that so quickly, just so distinguish in a way. When it comes to the body side, it's pretty clear that sleep is kind of downtime, right? So yes, your body is less active. There's rumors that you grow more in your sleep, maybe not only because your spine expands. You say it has effects on the immune system. But if I recall correctly, if you look at the energy consumption of the brain during sleep, it's not significantly less than in wakefulness. And so clearly the brain is active in different ways in sleep, which we can't really say about the body. It's not simply that the brain is switched off for repairs. It seems to be reprocessing things. Would that be correct?
Partly correct. The brain is very active during dreaming sleep. If you measure the blood flow during sleep, or the consumption of oxygen during sleep, you find out that during REM periods, the 5 to 7 minutes of the first one, the 15 minutes of the second one, etc., at that time, brain activity is much more intense than during waking. It's go down in between the dreaming periods. So again, REM sleep has probably different function than the other stages of sleep. I'll give you one of the first facts about sleep was the secretion of growth hormone, the hormone that is responsible for the growth, somatic growth of the body. Growth hormone is secreted during non-REM sleep, sleep stages that are not REM, during deep sleep. So probably during deep sleep, the function is completely different than during REM sleep. And this is a very intricate balance between the sleep stages that progress in a very structured way during the night.
Now you mentioned this consolidation thing, and I'm super interested in this, and we've had a few questions on the Q&A about this as well. So, I mean, my own metaphor, I don't know if you would agree with this. You know, sometimes, again, partly through insomnia, you try to log on to your online banking at night. And they say occasionally that the online banking has been taken offline for some maintenance. And from my point of view, that's like good news, because I wouldn't want the bank to be messing around with all of this stuff while people are able to actually do transactions. And it feels to me as if somehow, especially in the REM, in the REM sleep, we are able to sort of reconfigure connections and things that we have acquired or learned during our time of wakefulness, to reconfigure them in ways that wouldn't be efficient if we were actually acting them out. And you mentioned the paralysis that accompanies REM. Is that right? And is that partly the importance of REM, this consolidation of things that we've learned during the day?
Yes, it's rehearsal of what we learned during the day, and particularly of motor movements. For instance, I would say that violinists or people who use very delicate motor movements, these are almost rehearsed by the brain during REM sleep and provide some kind of training or virtual training to the mechanism that we activate during waking. But
so you take the motor system offline in order to rewire.
Right. Offline training, yes, absolutely.
Okay, okay.
And there are several studies showing it.
So yeah, and is that right that if you interfere with the REM sleep, people don't improve with the skills that they learned the day before?
Right, right.
Yeah. So again, I think it's a really big confusion that people have, and again, we've seen it in the Q&A. We know that sometimes during sleep, people move. And you've mentioned that there is paralysis, that the motor system particularly is taken offline in dreaming. I think most people's intuition would be that, particularly for extreme cases of sleepwalking and so on, I'd love to talk about that, but even in kind of cases where you're flailing around, there should be some connection between the dreaming that you're having and the movements of your body. But you're suggesting that in REM sleep, you're actually paralyzed. So,
Yes,
so can you help us with these sleep movements? It's quite counterintuitive, I think.
Again, very interesting subject. We know there is a phenomenon called parasomnia, sleepwalking, sleep talking, shouting, pavor nocturnus, shouting during sleep. These very complex motor events never occur during REM sleep. In recent years, they found out a unique phenomenon called REM disordered behavior, in which you suddenly from REM sleep break the paralysis and behave in a very violent way, very violent way. Many of these patients later on develop Parkinson. So there is a mechanism that causes the paralysis, inhibiting the motor neuron, the neurons in the spinal that are responsible for the motor behavior. And if you break this inhibition or this paralysis, it's a sign that something in your brain is not functioning well. And in several years, you may develop some motor problems related to Parkinson.
Okay, so you said but generally speaking, it's switched off so that the violinist doesn't do violin playing when she's consolidating.
Absolutely.
Right.
Otherwise, each one of us would carry on the dreams.
Right.
Many dreams have to do with floating in the air or jumping or falling, etc. What would prevent us from acting
So in
out?
the general case, what is happening for the people who are doing these movements? You know, you could make a cup of tea, I don't know, walk around the place. They're not dreaming of making a cup of tea, but they are still thinking about it in some way. It's very confusing.
They are not aware of their behavior. They are simply not aware of their behavior. All the other parasomnia, the sleep talking, the sleep talking, the shouting occur during deep sleep, not during REM sleep, and they tend to disappear with maturation. They are very characteristic of children, but once you grow out of them. The REM disorder behavior appear much later in life, in people in the 60s, 70s, and usually they herald some kind of a brain dysfunction.
But then these jerks, we've had several questions on the Q&A about people jerking in their sleep, and I guess these questions are almost always from the people who happen to be in the same bed at the time as the person who is doing the jerking. So they're not really, in your view, driven by anxiety or by bad dreams as such? Is there a connection between anxiety and this flailing around?
Not necessarily. Insomnia people, for instance, those that suffer from multiple awakening insomnia, these are the people who wake up many times during sleep, tend to change position. But during sleep, each one of us has a certain number of body movements that are synchronized with the sleep cycle. For instance, before we enter dreaming sleep, and once we complete a dreaming sleep, we change body position. And this is persistent every night. This is a kind of a structured motor mechanism that activates the body before, as if we change our seats in a theater in order to better see the dream that is going to screen on the wall of our brain. So each one of us has a certain number of about 20 gross body movements during sleep that are synchronized with the sleep-wake cycle. Now, there are some disorders of sleep that are associated with excessive movements. There is a phenomenon called restless legs movements. And these are patients who jumped their legs every 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. And I have seen patients like this, and we even have movies of patients like this. And when you look at the legs, you see the legs coming up and down every 20 seconds. And the bed partner can show you the blue signs where they were kicked during sleep. So this is one of the motor disorders during sleep that responds to medications. Sleep apnea syndrome. This is the most prevalent sleep disorder when patients stop breathing during sleep. In many cases, or in most cases, when they resume breathing, it is with explosive body movements. Some of them who stop breathing for a minute, then the entire body is participating in the ability to resume sleep. And then, of course, there are body movements that to the onlooker can look very, very violent.
Yeah, and it sounds like sleep disorders is a two-body problem in many cases.
Absolutely.
In that way. And just on this thing, just the final piece, and again, we've had several questions about this. There's this concept of lucid dreaming, which is discussed much in culture. I'm not sure we have time for this philosophical question about whether you invent the dream when you wake up and recall it. But is this a real thing, and what do we think is going on in this? Can you define it for those people who are not sure what it is?
Very few groups did scientific studies of lucid dreaming. Let me just explain in a minute what is lucid dreaming. A lucid dream is a dream in which you know that you are dreaming. You know that you are dreaming, and you can even communicate with the environment. So I know that I'm in a dream, and I can even signal to somebody outside that I'm dreaming. And there is a big debate in the literature whether this is dreaming or this is a fugue state between wake and sleep. Because during lucid dreaming, the brain has more alpha waves, which are the waves that are characteristic of waking, than during dreaming or REM sleep, when the brain wave, the dominant brain wave, is theta and not alpha. So very few, it's a rare phenomenon. I would say that 1 in 1,000 have lucid dreams. Some people even try to teach you how to have lucid dreaming because they think it's good for creativity, etc. But it's still debated whether this is a real dream or some kind of in-between wake and sleep phenomenon that create this kind of hallucinatory activity.
So then, we've spoken of one of the uses of sleep, which is very specifically about motor consolidation. So you're learning a skill during the day, you turn the motor system off, you practice it at night, you're better when you wake up. But I feel, and we've had several questions about this on the Q&A, that there's a more general sense that you can go to sleep without an answer to a problem and wake up with a solution. And sometimes that's accompanied by a dream in which, famously Kekulé, the chemist who discovered the structure of the benzene ring, dreamt of a snake swallowing its tail and so on. But actually my sense from the questions and from popular discussion of this is it's not that people necessarily dream the answer to a problem, but somehow they've kind of worked it out in their sleep. Is there any reality to that? And do we understand what might be happening there?
Well, very interesting. In my book, The Enchanted World of Sleep, I cover this phenomenon of creativity and dreams and finding solutions. By the way, the Kekulé story is doubtful. The reason is when you read Kekulé's story, how he came with the benzene ring, dreaming about or seeing.
It's the structure of carbon molecules, the 6 carbons, yeah.
It's a ring with a snake catching the tail of the other snake, forming a ring. He described a phenomenon in which he's lying on the floor in a kind of a semi-sleep condition. He wasn't asleep. He was daydreaming more than sleep. So it didn't occur to him during dreaming sleep. But REM sleep sometimes provide you, when you think about your daytime problems, and as I said, we dream about things that are of concern to us. And suppose you have a problem in your research or in your work or in your family life, sometimes dreaming about it, provide you with a point of view that is completely original. You would never think about it because we used to think along very, I would say, a rigid way of looking at things, and we never break to think from a different point of view or different angle. So the dreaming scenario sometimes allow you to see the event from a different point of view, which provide you with a solution, because it's free of the logic to which we obey during the waking period. So this is one of the explanations for the ability to solve problems, to wake up from sleep with a solution to a problem that bothers us for many days or many weeks. So it's a new way, an original way to look at a problem which is not subject to our habitual way of solving problems.
I want to ask you about afternoon naps also, because it's something which I'm very fond of. I take a nap most days, also when I'm working. But there was a creativity pump I heard of one time. You need the following tools. You need a notebook and a pencil. You need an armchair, and you need a metal ball and a hard floor. And you hold the ball in your hand. You sit in the armchair after lunch. You just wait for a while. After some time, your eyes close. When you fall asleep, your hand relaxes, the metal ball falls out of your hand, bang onto the floor, wakes you up immediately, and you write down in the notebook the first thing that comes into your head. And this is often a good technique for coming up with creative solutions to problems.
Daniel, this is catching hypnagogic hallucinations at the rite of occurrence, because during the period of transition between wake and sleep, we have sometimes few minutes of fleeting visual hallucinations that, again, are not obey to logic, don't obey to our habitual way of looking at things, and they can carry with them some new solutions or new aesthetic elements that we didn't think about. So the way with the metal ball is to catch these hypnagogic hallucinations at the time of creativity.
A friend of mine, Richard Wiseman, has done a nice experiment with an app where where the app sort of detects when you fall asleep, and then you can have messages that will be played auditorily into the nap. And I just wonder, is this business of suggestibility in sleep real? Do we have evidence?
No.
It's a nice idea.
I have an anecdote for you. When I was a PhD student, I did my PhD at the University of Florida in Gainesville. At that time, there were two meccas of sleep research. One was Stanford, one was Gainesville. I preferred Florida for some reasons. And when I came to the laboratory, they had an experiment in which they tried to teach people to talk Russian during sleep. So the entire laboratory was filled with people with earphones, lying on the floor with electrodes and everything, and they played to them Russian during sleep. This was financed by you can guess, in the US. And after about a couple of months, they came to the conclusion that you cannot study Russian during sleep. The reason to do the study was that there was a Russian report that in Russia, they could teach people to understand English during their sleep. But this is no wonder. At that time, you come to a village in Russia and you tell them, you must know English during sleep, and they have no choice. They have to study English one way or the other. Anyway, there is no evidence so far that you can really affect in a suggestive way. There are some studies in the Weizmann Institute, by the way, that showed that using smell, you can enhance events during the day. So if you can associate a smell, let's say of a rose that during the day were associated with an event and you show it during sleep, you can strengthen the association during the wake time. So maybe some senses are more open during sleep than the auditory sense and other senses. And smell is probably one of them. Beautiful study in the Weizmann Institute.
Glad to hear it. So there are going to be many questions that we won't answer, anyway in the studies and also from the Q&A, but there's a thread of questions here which interests me also as the father of teenage daughters about age and sleep. So we've had some questions about menopause and sleep. We've had questions about whether people need less sleep when they're older. There is a school down the road from me in Camden in North London where they are, when they're in the school in the first place, starting school later because they claim there are studies which show teenagers really don't function. I mean, my daughter claims she doesn't function, blah. So can you just give us in a few minutes, what this arc from teenage to old age in terms of sleep looks like?
Sleep is affected by aging, there's no doubt about it. And the length of sleep, the depth of sleep, and the structure of sleep are all affected by age. Elderly people have less deep sleep, and the threshold of awakening is such that they can be wakened by noises that won't affect a teenager even 10 times more intense. So we pay a price for getting older. There's no doubt about it. Teenagers indeed need more sleep. And
I'm just going to go and get my daughter and have her listen to this bit. Wait there, but yeah, keep going.
Not only that, teenagers have a delayed sleep period. So the circadian clock tend also to push them to go to sleep later on. In Israel, there was a practice in schools, we called it the 0 hour. The 0 hour. The 0 hour means you start school 1 hour earlier than usual. So if usually they start at 8 o'clock, 0 hour means you start at 7, which means that you have to wake up at 5:45 in order to prepare yourself and to get to school. We did a study in the Technion, and we showed that the 0 hours is bad for you or for the child. The 0 hours, in fact, cause sleepiness during the early classes of the day, lack of attention, etc., etc. And I started a campaign in Israel, this was the late 80s, to abort the 0 hours. And I was successful. And the Israeli Minister of Health decided to avoid 0 hour whatsoever. And I said that many, many countries copied this practice and avoided and aborted 0 hours. And the fact that you spend the first 2-3 classes at school with your head on the table, asleep, because you woke up at 5:30 in the morning, didn't occur to the teacher that this is the reason. And we showed her that there is a link between performance in school and the time of waking. So my suggestion is to avoid 0 hour as a general practice, because teenagers sleep longer and later, and you cannot force on them a circadian clock that wakes them up too early in order to come to class.
I think it's so hard to remember back to the beginning of lockdown, but for many of us, the video of the Israeli mother talking about homeschooling was really the bit where we first realized that this was going to generate new culture as well as new anxiety. And I love the bit where she says, her teacher is living in a dream, in a fantasy, if he thinks that she's going to switch on the phone and talk to him at 8 in the morning. I can barely get her to turn over in bed. Perhaps, it's very clear that we could talk about sleep all evening. That's not a privilege that we have. And there are 2 other things I want to ask you about, and each of them really just for a minute or 2. But I know they're both things that are important to you, and actually the first very much also to me. The work that you've done in Technion around the range of students that you work with is something which people who love the Technion will be very familiar with. But I know that it's been a personal passion of yours. And I just wondered if you can speak for a minute or 2, and I hope the audience will forgive me for bringing this in, but I do think, in this COVID time, understanding how we can enhance the life chances of young people, especially from backgrounds that don't normally have advantages that many of us do. We know that the COVID is affecting them worse. I think it's a relevant question now anyway. But Peretz, the work that you've been doing with students from different backgrounds, can you speak a little bit about that and how their careers have been enhanced? Because I think it's a really good Technion story.
Well, I believe that universities are very important to close social gaps and to bring education to underprivileged segments of society. One of my passions and one of my goals when I was assumed the presidency in 2009 is to make sure that underprivileged segments of Israeli society are provided with the means to graduate to study in the Technion and to graduate in the Technion. I'll give you one example. We did it for the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox. We did it with the Ethiopians, but the most successful program was with the Arab population in Israel. 10, 12 years ago, about 10% of our students came from the Arab sector. The most troubling issue was failure rate. Most of them couldn't make it because of poor educational background. They failed after the first year and dropped out from the Technion. So we started a program, structured program, in which we provided with Arab students who graduated from high school. And you know, in Israel, Arabs don't serve in the army, so they continue from high school to university. So we brought to the Technion, under boarding school conditions, group of Arab students, male and females, and provide them with enhanced education. We strengthened our knowledge in mathematics, in physics, in English, in Hebrew, and then they were applied to the Technion and judged based on their merits. There was no affirmative action whatsoever. Once they were accepted to the Technion, each one of them was appointed a big brother or big sister that accompanied them in order to overcome the hurdle of the first year. Fast forward 10 years, 20% of our students now are Arabs. Failure rate is similar to the general failure rate in the Technion, and excellence rate is similar to excellence rate in the Technion. This is a revolution. And the most amazing fact about it, there are more women than men from the Arab sector studying in the Technion. And remember, we are a technological engineering institute in principle, more women than men. So the Technion played a major role in incorporating Arab youth into the mainstream of society, making them available for the high-tech sector. 8 months after graduating from the Technion, almost every one of them find a job within the high-tech sector. So I'm very proud of it. And Nature, the most important scientific journal, together with Science, published a short article about it, complimenting the Technion for this project.
And I make no apology for bringing that in. And interesting, I was reading a research paper about sleep disorders during COVID in the UK, and it was noting that the effect of sleep disorders during COVID in the UK is disproportionately affecting people from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. So I think this issue of tackling inequality by the work that we do in universities is super important. Now, the final thing, and I'm only going to give you a very brief window for this, but I know it's important to you, Peretz. You can take the man out of the president's office, but you can't take the president's office out of the man. I know that you want to speak a little bit about the way that the university is funded to this audience, and I know we're here to talk about sleep, but I would be happy for you to mention this briefly, because I know it's something that's very important.
Well, it also linked with sleep, because I believe that sleep is disrupted, particularly in presidents of universities. They don't sleep whatsoever. And the reason is that suddenly you are not only in a health crisis, you are in an economic and financial crisis. Suddenly you have a large group of students who lost their job. And if you don't provide them with some kind of financial help, they will stop their studies. They'll drop out from school, not because the inability to cope with the demands of the Technion, but because they don't have the economic means. So the presidents of universities, and particularly the Technion, are losing their sleep, how to help this student. And we started an emergency fund in which we, faculty members, people on pensions, etc., gave up some of their salaries in order to help these students. And we started a campaign among our fund, among our supporters around the world, in order to provide us with the funds, in order to help students who lost their income because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then suddenly you realize that you have to have expenses that you didn't plan. For instance, we moved to online teaching. like Zoom became a very popular media, but you have to prepare studios for it. You have to buy cameras for that. You have to take a class and to turn it into online class. Just to give you a simple example, the Technion has to come with $1 million out of nowhere in order to provide 15 classes, online classes. And here again, lucky, our supporters around the world stood up to the challenge, and I encourage every one of them to think about the students, think about the Technion, and I'm grateful and thankful for everyone who provide us with support. And thank you, Daniel, for being such a marvelous, marvelous partner for this evening.
It's been a great pleasure. It's been, I think, one of the most popular subjects for these Technion UK talks, and it's not surprising. It's always interesting as a scientist when bad things happen. COVID is opening opportunities, but also creating terrible suffering and anxiety and inequality. But it does produce interesting data as well. And so it's been really interesting to look at the effects of the virus, of the current anxieties, and this collective sense that we have globally of this issue. Sleep is critical for all of us, and I applaud your efforts over so many years to probe it both from the research point of view, but also from the remedial point of view. It's been great to have so many questions from the Q&A from the audience, and it's lovely to have this sense of participation. And do tell your friends if they want to go to the Technion UK website, they will be able to see a recording of the talk. So thanks to Technion UK for organizing.
Good night and have a good sleep. Doctor's order.
לילה טוב, ליל מנוחה.
לילה טוב.